I didn't plan on being a bartender, let alone at a dive bar in the middle of nowhere. But $50 an hour? That's money you don't say no to. Especially when you've been scraping by like me, hopping between dead-end jobs. The bar, aptly named The Last Stop, was tucked off a lonely highway surrounded by dense woods. It wasn't exactly glamorous, but it had its charm. Dim lighting, faded leather stools, and the faint scent of stale beer mingling with pine. My first day started with a handshake from Tom, the owner, a wiry old man with a face carved by years of scowling at unruly patrons. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. Rules simple, he said, his voice a gravelly whisper. You serve anyone who walks through that door, except the STRSNGE man. At first, I thought I misheard him. The what? Tom's weathered face darkened. The STRSNGE man, he repeated. You'll know him when you see him. Pale skin, eyes too big for his face, and a voice like nails on glass. If he shows up, you ignore him. Don't look at him. Don't talk to him. Understand? I laughed nervously, waiting for the punchline. It never came. Is this some kind of initiation prank? Tom's stare was stone cold. Just follow the rule, kid. You'll be fine. The first few shifts were uneventful. Locals shuffled in, nursed their drinks, and left before midnight. The tips were decent, and the eerie rule faded from my mind until my third night. It started like any other evening. I was wiping down the counter when the front door creaked open. A man walked in, or at least I think it was a man. He was tall, unnaturally thin, with skin so pale it seemed to glow under the dim lights. His eyes, they weren't just big. They were bulbous, like glass marbles reflecting every flicker of the neon beer signs. I froze, my rag slipping from my hand. He took a seat at the far end of the bar, folding his long limbs with unsettling precision. Whiskey, he said. His voice was exactly as Tom described, razor-sharp and grating, like the sound of metal scraping against bone. I looked around, hoping someone else would step in, but the bar was empty. My hands trembled as I reached for the bottle, and then I remembered Tom's warning. Don't serve the STRSNG man. I hesitated, bottle in hand. His gaze bore into me, unblinking. The air grew heavy, pressing down on my chest. Whiskey, he repeated, slower this time, each syllable like a knife slicing through the silence. I'm sorry. We're closed, I stammered, stepping back. The man tilted his head, his lips curling into a smile that was too wide, too unnatural. You're lying, he hissed. The lights flickered. The hum of the refrigerator died. The air felt colder, and my breath came out in visible puffs. I reached for my phone, but the screen was dead. Panic set in. Serve me, and I'll leave, he said, his grin growing impossibly wider. I can't, I whispered, backing away. The man stood, his movements jerky, like a marionette controlled by an unskilled puppeteer. Do you know what happens to those who break the rule? His voice was louder now, reverberating through the empty bar. Get out, I yelled, grabbing a bar stool and brandishing it like a weapon. He laughed, a high-pitched, ear-piercing sound that made my stomach churn. The lights flickered again, and for a moment, everything went dark. When they came back on, he was gone, but so were the bar's doors and windows. I was trapped. For hours, I searched for an exit, but the bar had become a labyrinth. Every time I thought I found a way out, I ended up back at the counter, the bottle of whiskey sitting ominously in the center. Then I heard it, the faint sound of nails tapping against glass. I turned slowly. The STRSNG man was outside, his face pressed against the window that wasn't there before. His grin was gone, replaced by a look of pure rage. You can't keep me out forever, he said, his voice muffled but still sharp enough to cut through my sanity. I ran to the storage room, barricading the door with crates of beer. The tapping grew louder, more frantic. Then it stopped. I held my breath, the silence deafening. Slowly, I turned around, and there he was standing in the corner, his eyes glowing in the dark. You should have served me, he whispered. The next thing I remember is waking up in the parking lot, the sun blinding me. The bar was gone, replaced by an empty lot overrun with weeds. My car was the only thing there, keys in the ignition. I drove straight home, quitting the job without a second thought. But sometimes late at night, I hear it again, the tapping, faint and rhythmic. And when I look out the window, I swear I see him standing in the shadows, waiting for me to break the rule. I try to put that night behind me, but how do you forget something like that? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him. His too wide grin, his eyes that didn't belong to anything human. The sounds followed me too. The faint tap-tap-tapping would start just as I drifted off to sleep. It was subtle at first, like branches brushing against a window, but it always grew louder. Then came the whispers. They started a week after I left the last stop. I'd be alone in my apartment, brushing my teeth or scrolling mindlessly on my phone when I'd hear them. They weren't clear, just a low murmur, like a conversation happening just out of reach. I convinced myself it was the neighbors, or the TV, or anything but him. But deep down, I knew better. One night, the whispers grew distinct. "Serve me, and I'll let you go." I dropped my toothbrush, staring at my reflection in the mirror. My face was pale, my eyes sunken from too many sleepless nights. The room felt colder. Behind me, the bathroom light flickered. "Serve me." I spun around, but the bathroom was empty. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it would burst. "Leave me alone," I screamed. My voice echoed, sharp and desperate. But the whispers just laughed, a sound like glass breaking underwater. I stopped leaving the apartment, calling in sick to my new job. Not that I'd last long there. I was jumpy, distracted, barely holding it together. Friends stopped calling after I blew off their invites one too many times. I couldn't risk going out. What if I saw him? One night, I woke to the sound of my door unlocking. Click, click, click. I sat up in bed, holding my breath. The door creaked open, the sound dragging out painfully, like nails on a chalkboard. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept by my bed and tiptoed to the living room. The door was wide open, swinging slightly in the breeze. There was no one there. My hands trembled as I closed it, locking it twice. I turned to head back to bed and stopped cold. The STRSNG man was sitting on my couch. He didn't move, didn't speak, just stared at me with those unnaturally large eyes, his face blank but somehow expectant. "Why?" I whispered, the bat slipping from my hands. "Why are you doing this?" He tilted his head, just like he had at the bar. "Because you broke the rule." The room blurred as tears welled up in my eyes. "I didn't serve you. I followed the rule." His grin returned, slow and deliberate. "You think the rule is about me?" I froze, my blood running cold. He stood, his movements as jerky and unnatural as before, and took a step toward me. "The rule isn't about protecting you. It's about feeding me." "Well, what are you talking about?" "You followed the rule, yes." He paused, tilting his head to the other side. "But every time someone obeys, it feeds me. It lets me grow stronger." I stumbled back, my legs hitting the edge of the coffee table. "You're lying." "Am I?" He leaned in, his face inches from mine. His breath smelled like ash and rot. "You've seen what happens to those who don't serve me. Do you think the ones who disobey simply vanish?" My mind flashed back to the missing posters that lined the walls of the bar's back room. I had barely paid them any attention at the time, assuming they were just part of the dive's grim aesthetic. "What did you do to them?" I choked out. His grin stretched wider, splitting his face like a cracked porcelain mask. "They didn't feed me, so I made them part of me." Suddenly, the room was gone. I was back at the bar. The walls pulsed like they were alive, covered in something slick and black. The whispers surrounded me now, louder and clearer. "Help us," they begged. I turned, and the faces of the missing stared back at me, their features distorted and twisted, trapped within the walls. Their mouths moved in unison, forming words I couldn't comprehend. The STRSNG man appeared behind the counter, watching me with dark amusement. "This place is mine. Every soul that obeys, every rule that's followed, it all strengthens my hold. You thought you were escaping, but you never left." I stumbled back toward the door, but it wasn't there anymore. The walls were closing in, the faces contorting in agony as they pressed closer. "You can still end this," he said, his voice soft now, almost gentle. "Serve me, just once, and I'll let you go. No more whispers, no more tapping, no more nightmares." I hesitated, my breath hitching. Where he continued, his grin returning, "You can stay. Become part of my collection." I woke up in my apartment again, drenched in sweat, the air thick with the scent of stale whiskey and something metallic. On my coffee table was a bottle of whiskey and a single glass, empty but ice cold. The tapping hasn't stopped. Neither have the whispers. But I haven't poured the drink. Not yet. I didn't touch the bottle of whiskey. Not that night. Not the next. But it didn't matter. It was always there, waiting for me. No matter where I hid it, in the closet, under the sink, even outside in the trash, it always found its way back to my coffee table, pristine and cold, as if daring me. And the tapping? It grew louder. It wasn't just at the windows anymore. It followed me everywhere. On my bedroom walls, behind the mirrors, even from beneath the floorboards. The whispers, too, changed. They weren't just murmurs of pleading anymore. They were sharper, angrier, accusing. "You're selfish. You're a coward. Why won't you end this?" One night, I woke up to a suffocating silence. No tapping, no whispers. Just an unnatural stillness that pressed against my ears. The air was thick, heavy, and smelled faintly of smoke and decay. I sat up, heart pounding, and froze. The SDRSNG man was sitting on the edge of my bed, his bulbous eyes reflecting the faint glow of the streetlights outside. He wasn't smiling this time. "I gave you a choice," he said, his voice quieter now, but no less sharp. "Serve me, or let the others suffer. And you've done neither." I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. "I'm patient," he continued, tilting his head. "But they're not." Suddenly, the walls of my room began to ripple, like the surface of a pond disturbed by a stone. Shadows seeped out, pooling on the floor and rising like smoke. And from those shadows, faces began to emerge. Faces I recognized. The missing. Their eyes were hollow, their mouths twisted in silent screams. They reached out to me, their hands skeletal and trembling. "You did this," one whispered, her voice like dried leaves rustling. "You're keeping him alive." Another moaned. I scrambled off the bed, backing into the corner, but they kept coming. Their hands clawed at me, cold and brittle, leaving deep scratches on my arms. "Stop!" I screamed. "I didn't ask for this." The SDRSNG man stood, his lanky frame unfolding like a grotesque puppet. "They can't stop. Not until you do what's necessary." "What do you want from me?" I sobbed, my voice breaking. He leaned down, his face inches from mine. "I want what's owed. A drink. A simple act of service." The faces dissolved into the shadows as he straightened, but the scratches on my arms remained, stinging and raw. I sat on the floor, trembling as he disappeared, leaving me alone with the bottle of whiskey now sitting at my feet. I didn't sleep that night, or any night after that. The next evening, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I had to get rid of the bottle once and for all. I grabbed it with shaking hands and drove out to the woods surrounding the last stop. The bar was gone, of course, just like before, but the clearing where it once stood felt wrong. The air was colder here, and the trees seemed to lean in, their twisted branches clawing at the sky. I could feel eyes watching me, though I knew I was alone. I dug a hole in the frozen ground, tossing the bottle in and covering it with dirt. "Stay gone," I whispered, my breath visible in the icy air. As I turned to leave, the ground began to shake. The earth split open, and from the crack, a hand emerged, a skeletal, decayed hand that reeked of rot. Another followed, and then a head. It was him, pulling himself out of the ground, grinning wider than ever. "You can't bury me," he said, his voice echoing in my skull. "You've already invited me in." I stumbled back, tripping over roots as he emerged fully, his lanky body towering over me. "Run," he whispered. I did. I made it back to my apartment, locking the door and barricading it with whatever I could find. My heart raced as I waited, expecting him to follow. Hours passed. Nothing happened. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sliver of hope. Until I heard it. Tap, tap, tap. It wasn't coming from the window this time. It was coming from inside the apartment. I turned slowly, my breath hitching. The bottle of whiskey sat on the coffee table, and next to it was a glass, filled to the brim with a dark, viscous liquid that wasn't whiskey. It smelled like blood, The SDRSNG man's voice echoed from everywhere and nowhere at once. You can't run. You can't hide. Drink, or they'll all take your place. That was 3 days ago. I haven't left my apartment since. The tapping never stops now, and the faces are back, pressing against the walls, watching me with hollow eyes. The bottle is still there. So is the glass. I'm writing this now because I think I'm out of time. The shadows are creeping closer, and the whispers are no longer whispers. They're screams. I don't know what happens if I drink. I don't know if it will end this, or if it will seal my fate. But I know one thing. The SDRSNG man doesn't make empty promises. I've spent the past few days in this apartment, trapped in a cycle of terror and paralysis. The shadows have grown bold, reaching across the floor in jagged, claw-like streaks. The faces in the walls have become more defined. Their hollow eyes follow my every movement, and their mouths, those twisted, silent mouths, now move in sync with the whispers. The whispers aren't just sounds anymore. They've become memories. My memories. They replay moments from my life, but they're wrong, twisted. I see myself as a child, sitting at my grandmother's table. She pours me a glass of milk, but when I reach for it, the liquid inside turns black, bubbling like tar. Her face melts, shifting into his, the SDRSNG man's, and he grins, teeth too many, too sharp. I see myself walking through the park with my first girlfriend. She laughs, but when I look down at her hand, it's skeletal, the flesh peeling away in strips. Her voice changes, turning guttural. You didn't save me. Last night, I heard something new. A knock. It wasn't the usual tap-tap-tapping. It was deliberate, rhythmic. 3 knocks, then a pause. 3 more. It came from the front door. I froze, clutching the baseball bat that's now permanently glued to my hand. Who is it? I croaked, my voice barely above a whisper. The knocking stopped. Then his voice came, soft but clear from just behind the door. You know who it is? Open up. I didn't move. Couldn't move. You can't stay in there forever, he said, his tone almost playful. I'll wait, but they won't. The walls began to tremble. The faces pushed through, their mouths opening and emitting a low, guttural wail that made my ears bleed. I stayed awake all night, staring at the door, but he didn't come in. He didn't need to. He was already inside me, inside my mind. This morning, I found something new on the coffee table. A photograph. It was a picture of me, standing behind the bar at the last stop. But it wasn't a memory I recognized. In the photo, I wasn't wearing my usual uniform. I was dressed in a suit, sleek, black, and immaculate. And I was smiling. But it wasn't my smile. It was his. The tapping has become unbearable. It's not just on the walls now. It's in my head, hammering against my skull like a relentless drumbeat. My hands shake constantly, my body drenched in cold sweat. I've started dreaming of the bottle. Not drinking it, but pouring it out. Each time, it's different. In one dream, the liquid turns into fire, consuming everything around me. In another, it becomes blood, pooling at my feet and rising higher until I'm drowning in it. But the worst dream? The one where I drink it. The moment it touches my lips, everything shifts. I'm no longer in my apartment. I'm back at the bar behind the counter, dressed in that same black suit. The SDRSNG man stands across from me, watching, his grin impossibly wide. Now you understand, he says. I look down at my hands. They're not mine anymore. They're too long, the fingers bent at unnatural angles. The customers at the bar aren't customers at all. They're the faces from my walls, twisted and desperate. And they're begging me now. Please, they say, don't serve him. But I do. I always do. When I wake, I'm soaked in sweat, the whispers louder than ever. Drink, they chant now, over and over. Drink, drink, drink. I've started to wonder if they're right. If drinking is the only way to end this. Tonight, the shadows are everywhere. They crawl across the ceiling, pooling in corners, forming shapes that don't stay still. The faces have multiplied, their eyes glowing faintly. They don't just watch anymore. They reach for me, their hands pressing through the walls like they're made of mist. The SDRSNG man hasn't appeared, but his presence is suffocating. I can feel him just out of sight waiting. The bottle glows faintly now, a sickly, unnatural light emanating from the liquid inside. The glass beside it is no longer empty. It's filled to the brim, the liquid rippling as though alive. I pick it up. The whispers stop. The shadows freeze. The room falls silent. For the first time in weeks, I feel calm. But just as I'm about to drink, I hear a voice, a new voice, faint but clear. Don't. It's not what you think. I look around, but there's no one there. The voice comes again, louder this time. He's lying. Drinking won't end this. It'll only make you his. I drop the glass, and it shatters, the liquid hissing as it seeps into the floorboards. The calm vanishes instantly. The shadows erupt, writhing like a storm, and the whispers turn into screams, furious, anguished screams. And then he's there, standing in the middle of the room. You made your choice, he says, his grin gone, his eyes blazing with fury. Now live with it. The shadows consume the room, and everything goes dark. When I wake, it's morning. The bottle is gone. The faces are gone. The whispers and tapping are gone. But so is my reflection. I stand in front of the mirror, staring at the empty space where my face should be. And then, faintly, I hear his voice, echoing from deep within the glass. I'll be back. You'll serve me yet. I'm not sure if he's right, but I can't shake the feeling that I'm already his. I couldn't live like this, trapped, haunted, always waiting for the STRSNG man to claim me. I needed answers, a way to break free. I remembered something strange about the last stop. It wasn't just a bar. It was a place that appeared and disappeared. If it had the power to manifest, maybe it held the key to ending all of this. So, I did what I never thought I'd do. I went back. The clearing where the last stop once stood felt different this time. The air was heavier, colder. My breath crystallized in front of me as I stepped into the overgrown grass. And there it was. The bar had returned. Its neon sign flickered faintly in the twilight, the hum of electricity barely audible. I hesitated at the door, hand hovering over the worn wood, before pushing it open. Inside, it was exactly as I remembered. Dim lighting, the faint smell of whiskey and old wood, and that jukebox playing its melancholy tune. But this time, there were no customers. Only him. The SDRSNG man sat at the counter, waiting, his long fingers drumming against the polished wood. You came back, he said, his voice smooth and cold. I stepped forward, my hands trembling, but my resolve firm. I'm not here to serve you. I'm here to end this. He chuckled, low and guttural. End this? You don't understand. You're already a part of it. I slammed my hand on the counter, surprising even myself. No, you're wrong. There's always a way out, a way to stop you. His grin faltered for the first time, and his eyes narrowed. You think you're the first to try? This isn't a game you can win. I reached into my pocket and pulled out something I'd brought with me. A small, worn Quran. My grandmother had given it to me years ago, back when I thought such things were mere superstition. But now, I clung to it like a lifeline. I opened it and began to recite, my voice steady despite the fear clawing at my chest. The bar trembled. The jukebox stopped. The SDRSNG man's grin vanished entirely, replaced by a snarl. Stop, he hissed, his voice no longer smooth but guttural and raw. You don't know what you're doing. But I did. The words flowed from me, filling the space, pushing back the darkness. The walls of the bar began to crack, light seeping through. The SDRSNG man recoiled, his body twisting and contorting as if in pain. This isn't over, he roared, his voice echoing as the bar collapsed around us. You'll never be free. But I kept reciting, louder, stronger, until he was gone, until everything was gone. I woke up in the clearing, the morning sun warming my face. The bar was gone, nothing but grass and trees where it once stood. The whispers were gone, the shadows, the tapping, all of it. I stood, feeling lighter than I had in months. For the first time, I felt free. I quit my job that day. Some rules aren't worth breaking, and some forces aren't meant to be faced. But I kept the Quran, because in a world filled with shadows, you never know when you might need the light.